Welcome to Red, White, and Blue. From the right, I'm Gary Pauland.
And from the mostly left, I'm David Jones.
Tonight we welcome Gene Locke. Gene is the second of four Houston mayor candidates we're going to interview during the month of October. Gene Locke is former Houston city attorney. He's former chief of staff for Congressman Mickey Leland, and he's now an attorney in private practice. Welcome.
Thank you.
Hey, Gene Locke, you've seen it all, it seems like, in your last a couple of decades.
I've seen some.
Okay. Well, here's what I don't understand about the mayor's race and mayors generally and the city of Houston's politics, and you can then address this as, we'll call this the vision question. It seems to me like the city of Houston and its mayor is set up to support employee groups, make sure that fire department works and the police department works, and then the deal crowd, which is developer, engineer, architect, and lawyer, that they get paid, and that the taxpayer pays them. That's what the city of Houston does. Is there anything else that y'all do?
Well, that's a very, very short-sighted view that probably leaves a whole lot out and probably misrepresents in some big, big ways. Obviously, there are stakeholders in the city. Employee groups are stakeholders. People who do business in the city are stakeholders. They have an interest in where the city is going. But my God, there are everyday people who are stakeholders in this city. There are people who do business in this city and don't do business with government that makes this city move forward. They provide the jobs and the growth and development of this city. It's the mayor's job to run a good, efficient system that serves the interest of all Houstonians and not be dominated by any particular group.
And I guess here's let me expand on my point. I don't see the campaign looking at and talking about the bus riders, the minimum wage workers, the people who need to apply for Medicaid but don't know where to go, the people who need to be on CHIP, the kids that need to be on CHIP. I don't hear anybody talking about those in terms of the broad issues. Is that because all of y'all want to do is just talk to conservative voters who don't care about these things?
No,
I reject that.
Yeah, I think you probably have not followed the campaign close enough to realize that we discuss a myriad of issues, mainly issues that people bring to us. So on any given night, I may talk to developers about the permitting process of Houston. I may talk to community activists about the tension between neighborhood protection and developers. But in the same night, I might talk to bus riders about the fares at buses. I might talk to non-profit agencies about the impact of fare increases. I might talk to some people who like light rail and some people who want better highways. So on the campaign trail, you really get an opportunity to talk to all Houstonians about things that matter to them. Now, what gets reported is different than what's talked about.
Well, let's talk about the stakeholders that really matter in the big picture in my mind, and that is the taxpayers, the people who pay to keep City of Houston government operating. If you look at the history over the last decade, property taxes for the average Houstonian have gone up well in excess of inflation. And I understand that the city doesn't control that, but we have a little entity we created called the Appraisal District that basically the City of Houston and other taxers, that's their agency. And so they've been running property taxes up. The city is, quite frankly, passed pittance of property tax relief for the taxpayers every year, but not much. Are you willing to take a stand and support a cap with the state legislature on increases in property tax appraisals at 5%?
I don't know that I'm willing to take a stake on 5%. What I am certainly willing on is to understand that you can't put an undue tax burden on people going forward. You know, short term you might think it helps the city. Long term it hurts the city because it stifles growth and development. It makes it difficult for people to own and keep homes in an area. And one of the things we've always had in Houston we've got to keep is a healthy, robust real estate economy. The cost of housing is reasonably affordable in Houston. It's very affordable in comparison to New York or Philadelphia or Los Angeles. And the reason that a lot of people move to Houston is precisely because of that. We can never get into a situation where the tax burden associated with home ownership so outstrips us that it begins to choke us off. Now, where the cap is, I think I want to study that and make some intelligent decisions that I feel comfortable in on where we are.
Okay, and then following up with that, the city of Houston is maybe facing a severe financial crisis. Tax revenues are down. There's a gap. What is it, 50 million, 75 million, whatever that is. So if you become the next mayor of Houston, you inherit the financial problems created by the last 6 years of maybe a white administration that spent too much money. You don't have to agree or disagree on that, but you would still inherit the problems.
So he would be the first person to disagree with Bill White on the show if he does.
So the question is, what are you going to do to deal with the financial crisis the city's facing?
I think the first thing is you've got to determine what the gap is. And we've heard the mayor say that it's a $25 million gap and it's manageable and he'll have it under control. You've heard the city controller who's running for office now say it's $103 million and it's out of control. The reality is we've got to know what that number is. Whatever that number is, we've got to balance our budget based on making revenues and spending come in line with each other. It is no different than running a household, no different than running a business. You've got to be able to try to bring those in sync. Now, bringing those in sync sometimes is a little harder than just saying it, and everybody will go out and say that. The reality is you've got to keep your basic services. You cannot sacrifice basic services. That's garbage pickup, keeping the city safe, et cetera, et cetera. But you've got to spread any reduction around so that all communities are equally hit and that no one community, no one segment of Houston bears the brunt of any cutbacks. You got to talk to people about where we are and let people kind of know and understand and have a collective community discussion about where our needs are in this city and why we have to tighten our belt. And then ultimately, the real solution is not trying to raise the taxes, but try to grow revenue in the city by creating a healthier Houston economy.
Well, if it's
like sales tax increases.
If it's
It's
the case,
growing jobs.
If it's the case that we're in a deficit position during the last 6 years of Bill White, and we know we haven't laid 1 foot of rail track. We know we still got the dirtiest air in the country. We're not hiring female firefighters. I mean, is the bloom off of this mayor's job of the last 6 years? Is it now seen as a failure?
I would not say that. I think Bill White has had a tough job, and I think he's done a good job. I think there are problems that he had coming in, and I think there are problems he's going to leave and that I will inherit. And let me tell you something. I'm going to do the best possible job I can. At the end of 6 years, if I stay 6 years, I might decide 2 is enough, but at the end of 6 years, people are going to look around and say, you know, Locke did good on these problems, but we still got problems. The task of the next administration is to take the hand that you dealt and play it in the best possible way, which means we're going to try to have to get city finances under control. We're going to continuously try to grow the Houston economy. I keep coming back to that because Houston has been the leader in job growth in America for the last several years, and we've got to never relinquish that crown. That's our ticket to success. But at the same time, we've also got to grow the diversity of this city. One of the things that Houston is blessed with is great diversity, and if we manage that diversity correctly, it will be one of our best assets. If we don't manage it correctly, though, it can be an albatross around our necks.
And one of the problems that the city doesn't necessarily deal with, but other big cities are getting involved with, is the failure of public education. Yeah. In the minority communities of Houston, I think the dropout rate may approach 50%. How can we possibly lift up the minority communities of Houston when half the kids are dropping out of high school?
Well, you know, public education is something all of us have a stake in. I want Houston to be a competitive city with other cities across the world. And you cannot be a competitive city with and workforce that's not trained and educated. And so while it manifests itself in the minority community, it becomes an economic issue for all of us. Having said that, I think that the mayor has to work with local school districts in a creative way to give support, to make sure that we do everything that's necessary to keep the schools going. But on occasion, the mayor has to be strong enough, direct enough to call out the education system, because if we're not educating people, we're not competitive. And we have to work together. We have to have some dialogue in a real sense. I'm going to be about trying to build neighborhoods, trying to build quality neighborhoods inside the loop, outside the loop. The anchor of most neighborhoods are the institutions in the neighborhood, the schools and the churches and the parks. If you don't have great schools in great neighborhoods, it's hard to develop those neighborhoods. So we've got to talk, because we can't be closing schools in neighborhoods where I'm trying to rebuild. It just doesn't make sense.
We had a deficit problem that y'all were talking about. Someone you know, Carol Robinson, was a city council member, wrote an op-ed piece. He said, you know, we need to do some different things. We need to shut down, or rather privatize all the golf courses. You need to go to the legislature and ask them to get authority so the hotel occupancy tax can go to public services rather than supporting baseball stadium, and he said we have to liquidate HSA, Houston Sports Authority, divide up the debt and the revenue, and let's move into another direction. What's wrong with those ideas?
Well, you have to take each one of them separately, and it would take a long discussion on each one. But let's deal with the concept. The concept is that when you are straddled with dire times and difficult situations, you need to make reasonable decisions, but you need to think creatively. And I think what Carole Robinson was trying to say in the article, without going through the particulars, is you need to put everything on the table and consider moving forward. I think that's a good thing, actually. I don't think any option ought to be off the table. Everyone needs to be looked at. Every option needs to be looked at in terms of what's the benefit, what's the downturn with it, and then make an evaluation. So, for example, there probably are some things that should be looked at as targeted for possible privatization. There are other things you should never privatize. Just it kind of goes since. The notion that we should liquidate some assets, some should be looked at. The notion that the Sports Authority is at the helm of the city's debt is just not realistic. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. So you look at every one, you try to make decisions, but Mr. Robinson is exactly correct in terms of putting options on the table. What he's trying to say is think differently. Don't try to do the same thing over and over and over again, thinking that you're going to get the same results, and that's good.
Well, you mentioned the Sports Authority, and maybe that's not necessarily the cure for the city's ails, but maybe it is. The city of Houston gave up lots of hotel and motel taxes as part of what they contributed to build the 3 sports palaces. And we built 3 beautiful stadiums, no question about it. But I think the number is $79 million a year that's diverted from hotel motel tax revenues to those stadiums to pay the bonds. If the city of Houston had another $79 million, we wouldn't be talking about a financial problem.
But that's a faulty premise. The Sports Authority does not take away from hotel occupancy from the city. The city is still collecting the same hotel occupancy that they've always collected. The notion is that the Sports Authority does collect hotel occupancy, but it's separate from the city. Look, we had an argument, and you and I have disagreed on this for a long time. We've had an argument on whether or not it was appropriate to spend public money for stadiums. I would like to think that that is dead and buried. So now the question is, was that a good deal? It's being resurrected 10 years later. Well, 10 years after the fact, we built 3 first-class, state-of-the-art facilities that have added to the sales tax collections in this city, added to an economic impact, added to increasing property values across the city, helped us revitalize downtown. We did all of that less than it cost the Dallas Cowboys to build 1 stadium.
Well, that's because of inflation. But how about this? Didn't we give away the store when we didn't have to?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so at all.
And understand, hindsight's 20/20. But looking back, I mean, why did we give the naming rights to 3 stadiums to the owners? And in some cities, they kept it for the municipality who put up the money. We could have done that.
There are a lot of ways that we could have spun this thing. I went in believing that the public sector should have a greater level of participation in the deal. As I got into it, I had a religious conversion. I came out of it believing that we ought to empower the private sector to do what the private sector does, and let's fix the obligations and exposure of the public sector. So, in this case, the public sector has no obligation relative to the upkeep and maintenance of those facilities. We used to have that at the Astrodome, and as you remember, for 20 years, the county,
we still do.
The county would fight with the owners of the Astros on who was going to do upkeep. We loaded off all of the insurance costs to the teams. But we gave them in return the right to naming rights, gave them the ability to make their profit as an incentive for them to run a first-class operation. We could continue a discussion about what happened 10 years ago or 12 years ago, but the reality is I think we've got some wonderful facilities.
You're saying Reliance Stadium, that we've got business development in and around Reliance Stadium. We've got business development around Minute Maid and Toyota. I don't know. I don't see it. And somebody brags about creating jobs. What are we talking about? Hamburger flippers? What jobs are sustained in this economy as a result of these, as Gary calls them, palaces that allows people from Conroe to come in and watch football games in Houston?
Those people from Conroe come in. They spend money in your city, and as a consequence, that money is used to benefit your city. Now, here's the reality. We're getting a brain lock here. Let's think back 10 years ago, exactly where Minute Maid Park is now and where Highway 59 was then. It was a haven, unfortunately, for homeless people. There was no development on the east side of town at all. And now you go there. You not only have restaurants in the area, you not only have office buildings in the area, you have tremendous commercial development, residential development with apartment complexes in the area, all of which are benefiting the tax base of this city, all of which are creating jobs for people in this city. That's a good thing.
All right, I have two questions related to that. Number one, the homeless are still there. And in fact, the city has an increasing homeless problem that I'm going to ask you to address.
I'm not going to deny that the city has a homeless problem. It is unfortunate. And it is, in some sense, a shame on our city. And certainly as mayor, I'm going to work at that. And I did not suggest that the stadium's reduced or eliminate the homeless problem. What I was suggesting was we've got economic development in the area that used to be a haven for the homeless.
Well, it's still a haven.
Well, was the commitment that was made by the Sports Authority and those that were promoting the various entities that we built that we, the taxpayer, would not be ever at risk? Was that accurate? And looking back on it, are you pledging that we won't spend any tax dollars?
The problem was you'd never spend ad valorem taxes on the stadium, and you never spend sales tax revenue on the stadium, and those will be maintained. That's not going to happen.
So what about the problems with the Reliant, where they're saying that they may have to go back to the taxpayers for $100 million because of problems?
Well, I think there's been some faulty reporting. The deal was backstopped with the idea that you would have insurance. If the Sports Authority is unable to meet its obligations, the only entity would be the county would have to pay a small amount of money. Mm-hmm. That comes out of parking revenue that was created by the stadium. So it's revenue that is a result of the stadium. The rest of it, if that's not able to be paid, who's on the hook is the insurer, MBIA. The stadiums will never be in default and will go to the creditors. It's MBIA that will be on the hook.
Okay.
That's a good deal.
Before we finish the stadium story, we got the soccer stadium. The city has already bought a bunch of land on the edge of downtown for a soccer stadium and made its contribution. As mayor, are you going to put more of the city's resources into building a soccer stadium?
Not the city revenues, no. Here's the deal. The city's already bought the land. I would require that the team actually handle the construction costs on the facility. And if there's any additional expenditures, it would come for infrastructure and related matter out of a TERS in the area. But I would not put any ad valorem taxes, any sales taxes, or any other city revenues in the area at all.
Our TERS is a good deal for the city. Doesn't that divert property tax revenue from the city's general revenue or coffers to go to the specific area where it's spent?
TERS is
Please define.
Oh, I'm sorry.
This acronym.
Spell
it out.
What is a TERS?
It's a tax reinvestment investment zone, and basically what it identifies an area that is in need of redevelopment, and if it is redevelopment and tax revenue goes up, the tax revenue that is created as a result of redevelopment then goes into an organization called a TERS, and they then use it for matters in that area. On the issue of whether they're good and bad, some are good and some are bad. And you should not have a philosophy that says, I'll never use them, I'll just create them forever and ever and ever. They are used to jumpstart a project in an area. If they're used properly, they can be a very good tool. If they're not used properly, you're right, they will threaten the overall development. What you don't want to have is a TERS in an area that is developing itself all along, because then you are clearly stifling off. And what you don't want to have are TERSs that are so abundant and numerous that there's no consistency between them on the kinds of services that are created. So for me, for example, in managing TERSs, all of them would have some responsibility on public safety, all of them would have some responsibility on infrastructure, and they'd have to coordinate that through the city, and I think that's kind of appropriate.
So now we need a soccer stadium, is what you're saying? We need a soccer stadium?
I think a soccer stadium is a good thing.
Yeah? Who's going to go to the soccer games?
I think the soccer fans in Houston.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. What's next? Lacrosse? We're going to have a stadium where somebody comes to town wants to have a lacrosse stadium?
Let me finish. If you've already got the land and you've got the team that's going to build it, and that will further increase the economic development in the area, and it can be a home for Texas Southern University to play, and it can be a home for high school playoff games that's sorely needed in this city. That's a good thing. Because it doesn't require any payments from the taxpayers.
You just convinced me. Now I got four quick yes or no's, okay. And then, Gary.
And I hate yes or no's.
Well, short answers then.
All right.
Should we be going to a city manager form of government like
that's
Dallas?
A short answer, no.
How should we? Was term limits a bad idea, and should we repeal it?
I think you need to have a term limits commission that Mayor White is appointed. I don't know that it necessarily has to be limited. I think we need to look at the form of term limits we have now.
We know the chief of police wanted another job, tried to get it, did not. Would you commit to replacing him immediately?
Not going to comment on the status of any city employee or appointee. I think it's improper for a candidate to literally put somebody in the political arena who is an appointee and say what you're going to do with them, because that person has to manage a whole department until you're elected. When I'm elected, people will know what I'm going to do.
And I think you've been much involved in Metro and its projects. One of your opponents says we should elect the Metro Board. Is that a bad idea when we know that they haven't laid a track, not a foot in the last 6 years? You got this guy, Frank Wilson, who's handing out consultancies all over the country at $100,000 a pop. Millions of dollars, apparently.
No, a small enough amount that the board doesn't vote. He just does it.
Just looks like, another playground for the deal crowd.
Well, two things in response to your question. One, whether a board is elected or appointed, it can be a good board or a poor board. The how the board is constituted does not necessarily give you a guarantee that it's going to be a good board. I personally think an elected board is a possibility one would look at, but it creates a new level of government that I don't know that I'm really into, because then you get people who have clear agendas who get run on those agendas. Now, the question of whether or not Metro or any other agency that is a government agency ought to be transparent, ought to be efficient with the use of their money, ought to be accountable for the expenditures, I'm all for all of that in every arena.
Are you satisfied with the present transparency going on with the Metro's leadership and the board?
I was troubled by the notions that the budget at Metro was not open to the public prior to a vote. I was troubled by the notion that committees were not posting their meetings. I think both of those are things that I would certainly rush to try to change, and I think they are being changed at Metro. But having said that, I think let's just go beyond Metro just a minute. Government in general has to be so transparent and has to be so open to people that anywhere the public has access to it. And now we live in an electronic era where information is just available everywhere. And we need to get out of the laws that were written 40 years ago on open records that was premised on paper documents and get into a 21st century where government is not open and accessible. And we need to be able to really communicate with people in a way that we've not. I'm the first candidate in this race who's actually had a online chat town hall meeting as a candidate, talking to people about issues. I think it's the cutting edge on where we're going to go in informing the public on what services are available and what cities are doing.
While we're still on Metro, it seems to me that we have been reducing bus service for those who need buses to get around the city. That would be the poor and those who are transportation challenged, and we've done that so we can divert money to build trains.
Parker says cannibalizing the bus service.
Are we doing that? And are we doing a disservice to those in the community who need the bus to get to where
they
need
to
go?
Two things. First of all, we're doing a disservice to this whole problem by not seeing that we've got a regional transportation problem, not an inner-city transportation problem. The economy of this city is premised on the notion that we can move people from one employment center to another, from your homes to your places of entertainment. We need choices in Houston, whether it's highways, whether it's light rail, whether it's buses, whether it's bicycles, whether it's commuter rail. And as a part of that, we need to make sure that we do have a clean, efficient, safe, timely bus system, because so many Houstonians are dependent on buses and will be for years to come. And if we have a very, very reliable, dependable bus system, it will aid their ability to participate in the productivity of the city. It's really hard to tell people, go out and get a job if you don't have the transportation to get there. If you can't get on a bus and go to your place of worship or go to a place of entertainment. So all of these are issues that we have to work on.
Yeah, that's a problem.
Yeah.
Gary's favorite subject is politics. I mean, I know you think you're going to be leading. I don't think you believe you can win without a runoff. Who's going to be second?
I don't know. And
who do you want to be second?
I don't have a choice. I mean, whoever is there is there. I am optimistic that I can keep telling the message that I'm telling, and I can keep talking to Houstonians, and it will resonate. And so I feel good about my posture, but I know that there's some good people in the races. They're working hard, and I'm going to have a competitive race with whoever is there.
Gene, do you find the interest is building in this race? Because for a long time, you all were working out there, all the candidates working really hard and not really getting a lot of press, not getting a lot of attention.
Finally, I think the interest is picking up. I'm still concerned about a low voter turnout. And I'm encouraging people, whether you vote for me or not, I'm encouraging people to go out and vote. We cannot have a few Houstonians dictating and determining the fate of this city and really the history of this city going forward.
By few Houstonians, you mean the voters or the ones that
voters.
write the check? What about the ones that write the check? Is that the one that's getting the most interest out of city government?
No, I think the voters have to get the most interest out of city government because I think people serve voters. And what I'm suggesting is that, yes, there is some interest in the race, not as much as we would like, of course, but I think it's growing. But before we beat up on people, let's understand, most Houstonians are in the midst of an economic downturn that is touching their lives. They've got daily the crisis in family and in pocketbook that kind of takes over. And that's understandable. We've got still the aftermath of Hurricane Ike that it kind of cripples the city. We've got kind of an offshoot of national politics that kind of keeps people at a burnout stage. So when you put all of those factors together, it results in a situation where Houstonians did not turn their attention to this race in August and in July and
they're
June.
Watching now.
I'm beginning to watch.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Gene Locke, for being with us today. It was fun.
It was fun. I enjoyed you guys.
Hope you did.
Thank you for having me.
You can view a follow-up of tonight's discussion if you go to HoustonPBS.org, so check that out. You can find out more about Gary if you want. And until next time, get informed and get active. And vote.
And they can even watch the show again if they liked it a lot.